Good morning. Good to have a few minutes together with you today. I hope you're having a good day and that you're walking with God. And I love that in thy presence in the Psalm 16, in thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. And there's some special internal as well as I think external blessings that come with being close to God. And don't think that the trials don't come with life. And I think as the years go by, the trials might get more difficult. Some of you that are older than me know that. But there's something about being near to God that brings a peace and a joy. And more than anything else, I want to protect that. I want to be near to God, and I want His closeness. And this morning, I want to just take a minute or two. We're closing out August, and I wanted to just one more time here in these end of August, first couple of days of September, mention a few things. We didn't have our meeting with Brother Donnelly on that Monday and Tuesday last week, and so we had some things planned we didn't get to say and talk about. This is just a few things, timeline-wise, things people turned into us that special dates to them. And somebody, let's see, 2004, somebody mentioned that their big memory of 2004 was we had this big day planned to be preaching everywhere, and it snowed. And not just snowed a little few flakes, it snowed a lot, like 6 inches of snow. And 2005, Noel and Elaine Ballo began attending church. 2006, Michael Gallardo started attending church at Faith Baptist here. Edgar and Angie Munoz started attending. Edgar Munoz was saved at Faith Baptist. Joyce Duncan began attending Faith Baptist. 2007, the Pearsons started attending. Amanda Cavanis started attending. She was a child at the time. She's now married. Amanda was saved in 2007, Mrs. Riley's Sunday school class. Pete Cleary was saved and baptized at Faith Baptist Church, and Michelle Abbott began attending in 2008, and she was saved in 2009 through the RU program with Charity Joslin. And then this next one, 2009, it's great. Andy and Christina Campales and Dexter and Christina Villanueva started attending Faith Baptist. The Campales has moved up from the San Diego area. The Villanuevas moved south from the Ontario area, and they'd come a few times. But I remember the same Sunday night, and their children are pretty close to the same age, and the Villanueva family came down this aisle, and the Campales family down this aisle, or the other way around. I could be confusing that. And they joined the church in the same night. Now they're both Filipino families. Both the wives are named Christina, and both families named their children AJ, BJ, CJ, DJ, EJ. And I'm thinking, I've got 5 or 6 kids here, 5 or 6 kids here. They're all named a letter and then a J. And both the wives are Christina. I decided I'm going to know Andy and Dexter, and I'm not going to know the rest of them. I'm going to mix up whose wife is who and whose kids are who for years. And both families are still here, teachers, leaders in the ministry, and what a blessing that night was. Brought some confusion, but what a huge blessing the Campales and Villanueva families have been to Faith Baptist Church over these years. Today, I wanted to mention, go over a couple of scriptures, a series of verses, and on the subject of covetousness and envy. These are subtle sins of the heart. It's one thing to have a drinking habit, a drug habit, bank robbery or whatever, things that are outward, things that we see. But it's an entirely different thing when it's sins of the soul, sins of the heart. And those things can often be worse in the case of covetousness. You read through, and I've mentioned this before, but you go through the Bible and follow the word covetous, and you'll see that it is perhaps talked about more than any other sin, except maybe adultery. I'm not sure about that, but it is talked about way more than most sins that are listed in the scriptures. And covetousness is that desire for something. The 10 Commandments: don't covet your neighbor's wife, and we'll look at that in a minute, or your neighbor's ox or his house or whatever. But envy is an evil beyond coveting. And it's almost like covetousness is the desire for something. And then when it becomes envy, it's covetousness with a malice and a heartless desire on top of the desire, an evil, a frosting of corruption on the heart of covetousness. But envy is often a justified sin. A lot of times we act like these things are okay because they don't hurt anybody. Well, God looks at the heart, and it bothers God. And what does God want? He desires a clean heart. He desires a pure heart. And it's not just a matter of I got to give up my drugs and liquor. I need to clean the inside up. And that's what's very important. Over in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30, it says, a sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy is rottenness in the bones. And that's a pretty terrible statement. Envy is the rottenness. That would be like a cancer. The rottenness, envy is the rottenness of the bones. In the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, thou shalt not covet. And here's a list. Thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his ass, or anything that is thy neighbor's. Over in Genesis 34, you see a guy named Shechem. And here's Jacob and his family, and they had Dinah, their daughter, and Shechem had a whole city. He was royalty in that place, and he had a whole city full of people, but he wanted Dinah, and his covetousness. He wanted her, and you read the story, and the end result of the whole story is all the men in his city die, and most of the adult women in his city die because he was covetous. And it's a tragic thing. Romans chapter 13, let me just read a verse or two here. Romans chapter 13, he's summarizing the law, and as God does on occasion in the New Testament, he says, let me summarize, what's the great commandment? Well, to love God and then to love your neighbor, and that's the sum of these, and that's what he's doing here in Romans 13. Paul is summarizing it. He says in verse 13, for this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And so covetousness is in there with murder and with envy and with stealing and lying. And just think about when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. Why? What was the root cause? Now, if you're just reading in Genesis, you're not going to get the story quite the same. It's always good to interpret the Bible with the Bible. So if you find where God in another part of the Bible talks about this, or in the New Testament, maybe God talks about it, well, that's what happens over in Acts chapter 7, verse 9. And those older brothers that sold Joseph into slavery, it says the patriarchs moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt. It was envy. They were envious maybe of Joseph's unique place in his dad's heart. Maybe they were envious because he'd stand up. Being the youngest, Benjamin wasn't born yet, or maybe he was so little he didn't go out. I'm not sure about the time exactly. But I guess Benjamin must have been born before Joseph was sold. But when Joseph stood and told his dad that his brothers were being crooked in the business dealings, he was standing against the 10 older brothers. And that's maybe they were envious of his willingness to stand. Maybe they were envious of the coat of many colors his father gave. Who knows what? But they envied him. And again, covetousness is desiring that which another has. I say, and I'm not going to fuss anybody who differs, but as you read through, if you read all the verses that talk about envy, it's going to paint a picture in your mind. And I say envy is that covetousness with teeth in it. It's covetousness with a desire to plan, to fix it, to solve it. And those brothers, they didn't just covet whatever it was in Joseph that they wished they had. They envied him, and they did something about it, and they sold him off into slavery. One of the tragedies, one of the many infections spread by social media are this envy and covetousness. You see somebody on a cruise, or you see somebody in a new dress, you see this couple smiling, or all these kids, want a trip, and they're taking a selfie with 8 or 10 of them. They post it on Instagram or whatever. Social media feeds this envy, covetousness, and then that gets turned to envy. And we're not very good at rejoicing because our brother's having a good time. And social media is corrupt anyway. You think about it. Here's somebody, you see this great picture of this family, husband, wife, kids, they're at Carlsbad Caverns. You think, oh, they're having such a good time, and that's such a great thing. I wish my family could do that. And you don't realize between Southern California and Carlsbad Caverns, there's, I don't know how many, like 15 hours of nothing, just desert. And then you go look, it's a cave with stalactite. I've not been there because of this. And then it's in there 15 hours or however many hours, 12 hours. I think it's longer than that back. And so you spend all these hours, but the only thing they show on Instagram is, or on whatever social media, is this cute picture with 10 million bats behind them. You don't see the 30 hours fighting in the car. And social media is such a fraud. And if it's between you and your family members, whatever is good for your home, that's fine. But I think TV news and radio news and the social media, I think they create an awful lot of wrong in hearts and insecurities. And when you find yourself wanting something somebody else has, envying them, being covetous toward them, Colossians 3:5 says we should mortify or kill those feelings. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And so Paul says to the Colossian people, kill that. You feel that covetous spirit arising in you, kill that thing. Get rid of that emotion. Look, God is enough. And I'll get to that in a minute. But God gave me some things. God gave you some things. I can rejoice in what God's given you. And I should be able to rejoice in what God's given me. And for me to look at what you have and to be envious and covetousness is saying that God's not good, that God is unfair, that God is better to you than he is to me, that God doesn't love me. I'm accusing and slandering God. And we don't want to be that way. Ephesians 5:3 says, let not covetousness once be named among you. Never should there be any covetousness in you. And it's a dangerous thing for people in the ministry because you start looking, here's a guy who started church and I started church and here he's got buildings and they're doing good and I'm struggling. I'm still renting a little storefront and barely getting along. And pastors aren't beyond having flesh. We're weak like anybody. We can be covetous and we could get bitter and envious at someone else because their kids turned out better than ours. And I'm singing the choir, but you get to sing the solos and whatever it might be. And Christian people can get envious and covetous of one another. Somebody gets a new car. Somebody gets a new job. How come they got a promotion? I'm just barely able to feed my kids and they've stumbled into this great deal. And it's sad because something good, God does something incredible for me. And you don't see him do something incredible for you. And then you get pouty at one another or whatever. One of my friends sent me a text one day and just a rejoicing text. Someone had given him $1.5 million. And I thought, that's unbelievable. And, our first emotion, wish it happened to me. Well, when we all have a little of that, don't act so pious like you'd never feel that way. But let's rejoice with them that rejoice. God's given me exactly what I need. We were in a tent for 9.5 years. And there were 3 men in our church, maybe a fourth. I can't remember the timing exactly, but I know there were at least 3 men that I had reached who had been trained here and gone out into the ministry. There were 3 that their church had their own buildings before we had a building here at Faith Baptist. And I think, God, what are you doing? And well, he's God, and he's doing whatever he wants to do. And the Bible says he does what pleases him. And if it pleases God to have me be in a tent for 9.5 years, and it pleases God to put somebody else in a building, that's their business. And I know one guy started a church, and before his first Sunday, someone gave him a church building ready to move into. One of our young men we helped them knocking on doors and tried to help out with some finances. And then we didn't do a whole lot, but we did a little. And we got involved some. And before he was there a few months, there was a church that was just about closing down. And he had already had a good group of people. And he was a good pastor. And there's a group of people with a building and no pastor. And the bottom line is it merged. And there they were, less than 6 months from when the church started. They've got a building and a nursery and a kitchen and all these things I'm envious of and covetous of. And oh, you know what? We should be so very careful, because I want to love the Lord my God with all my heart. And that's in those lists, when he says the great commandment, to love God with your heart, soul, mind, strength, the other three get reversed back and forth some in the different gospels, but he always starts with heart. And God wants us to love him with our heart. And I can't have a heart full of covetousness and a heart full of love for God. And so this thing of envy and covetousness is so very evil. Luke chapter 3. Let me just look over here. Luke chapter 3. And the Lord is talking to people about their right attitude of heart. People are saying, what should I do? And how should I handle this or that? And let me see if I can find the passage here. In Luke chapter 3, verse 10, and the people asked him, saying, what shall we do then? And he answered and said unto them, he that hath 2 coats, let him impart to him that hath one. And he that hath meat, let him do likewise. Then came also the publicans to be baptized, and said to him, Master, what shall we do? And he said, exact no more than that which is appointed you. In other words, don't overcharge anybody. The soldiers likewise demanded, saying, what shall we do? And he said unto them, do violence to no man, neither accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages. Oh, how about that? Be content with your wages. How about put that into the economic climate in our country over the last, not just right now, over the last 50 years? Be content with your wages. Now, this thing of, and I'm going to do another lesson, I think, and we're going to focus just on envy, because there's a whole lot of verses that we'll look at, just envy. But this thing of envy and covetousness, we got to be so careful, because it'll mess our heart up. And then when our heart's messed up, God doesn't have free rein to work through us. In the Proverbs 4, I'm going to say verse 23, it says, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. I've got to protect my heart so that all the issues, the spreading out, all the influences of my life will be blessed. But if I fill my heart with evil and criticism, slander, judgmentalness, that's not a real word, but you know what I mean, being a judge and a critic of people, or covetousness and envy, that evil heart, now all that spreads out is going to be bad. Oh, I don't want to be that way. And let's not be that kind of Christian. But over in Hebrews chapter 13, a great passage on this thing of covetousness, envy, and contentment. And the principle of contentment is based on the idea that God, as I said earlier, that God is faithful and that God is good. And I should be content because I have Christ, because he's enough. And so he says in Hebrews 13:5, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. Let your conversations, not just your words, but it's your words, it's your attitude, it's your whole lifestyle. Let your whole lifestyle be content. Be content. Our houses are too big, our cars too nice, our closets too full. Can we not be content with such things as we have? But notice the end of verse 5. He says, for, this is why you ought to be content. For he, the Lord said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. You want to know why I can be content? If I'm walking with God, and I'm not saying I'm always perfect at this, but if I'm walking with God, I can be content because I've got Jesus. And if I've got him, I've got enough. And I want to encourage you today, if you have Jesus, you have enough. If you've got the presence of God, I said earlier in Psalm 16, in thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. And envy and covetousness are a byproduct of being discontent with the presence of God. I think God is good, and I think God is faithful, and I'm going to trust him. And I'm not going to say I always do this with great sickness, with suffering of those I love. Those are hard days, but when I wrap my character, when my character wraps itself around my emotions and draws them back in, I'm going to say the Lord is good. I love that sermon E.V. Hill preached on Job. When E.V. Hill, he'd been dead for some years, what a great man, when he preached his wife's funeral, I don't know how many times, 10, 15, 20 times that sermon, maybe more. He quoted Job, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." He might have been crying through that, losing his wife. And this precious lady, called her baby. And he said, I lost her, but the Lord gave, and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And the text says, in all this, Job charged not God foolishly. I know you're with me, and I may not like my circumstances with health or finance or family, but blessed be the name of the Lord. He is the reason I'm content. I'm not content because people like me. I like it when people like me. But if my happiness and content was based on my friends being faithful, I would have quit a long time ago. Because the fact is, I've had some friends walk away. If my contentment was based on the medical world or the political world all being fair and just and right, I'd be so disgusted. But my contentment's based on him and his presence. He said in Hebrews 13:5, be content with such things as you have, for he said, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. You know what? He says, be content. I'm enough for you. I'm enough. And certainly, Jesus Christ is enough. And he'll see us through whatever you're facing today. He'll see you through. If I had asked prayer requests, I think most of you probably know by now, but a good friend, the Miller family, Pastor Miller went to heaven about 3 years ago, and their oldest son, Cheyenne, took the church, and for the next 3 years he pastored, and he went to heaven, 50 years old, and he went to heaven just this last week. And if you think to pray for the Miller family, that'd be great. And pray for the church as they make decisions. These are great people. And the family, I've been with the family, and they're wonderful people. And I love them. And but if you think to pray, I don't know if you need to call. It'd be good to pray and to ask God's blessing on them and give them grace and wisdom. The Lord's good, and we can trust him. And so you pray for this dear family. God bless you. Have a great day. We'll talk to you day after tomorrow.